Let's start with the mechanics exclusive to Mutant. For the ones you have no control over, the most important to note is that you take more damage than other characters. 10% to be precise. This means that losing interactions can feel a lot worse. It should be kept in the back of your mind when considering your risk versus reward. Another feature of Mutant, in air quotes, is the fact that he loses the ability to use dash back after dashing forward. This makes running away marginally more difficult, although all other options remain as usual. Finally, out of the non-influenceable mechanics, is the bonus sadness that Mutant receives when taking any action. For those not in the know, a hidden sadness meter exists that builds up when you run away, use projectiles, or just generally play in a defensive, stally way. If this meter is above 60%, you take extra damage, as seen by the red blinking sad indicator. And if it reaches 100%, indicated by the purple sadness indicator, you lose all defensive options and meter. This, in theory, means that defensive play is weaker when playing Mutant, but passive playstyles are already not terribly great to begin with. And with what you can't control out of the way, let's get into the meat of what makes Mutant both incredibly terrifying and incredibly interesting. Jukes. Juke is a mechanic that allows you to near instantly transport yourself a fixed distance, or cancel out all of your current momentum. Your ability to do so is represented by the green pips under your health bar. Juking in action takes 2 pips, and they are vital to your success when playing Mutant. Consider these your second health bar, because if you ever reach 0, you are all but dead. Generally speaking, you can spend pips to juke in 9 directions. This includes the cardinal directions as well as the corners, and a neutral option. When this toggle is flipped, shown on screen, wherever the red indicator is the direction you will be moved, with the center circle forcing you to stay in place. Not all options are always available, and many moves have limited juke angles, specifically for balance purposes. But all offensive and movement tools can be juked in some direction, and they are a very flexible tool. While each of these uses will be covered in their respective sections, they can pretty much do it all. Combo extending, mix-ups, defensive play, it's good at all of them. Either way, at this point I've only told you how to spend pips, but how do you gain them? There are actually a surprising number of ways. Most simply, you can either finish Howl or Hustle in their entireties. Both grant a large number of pips, and while Howl costs 2 meter, it is a much faster option. If you find yourself both short on time and meter, you can instead simply hit your opponent. Hitting either block or raw gives you 1 pip in return. Multi-hitting moves give 1 pip for each hit of the move, so corkscrew or shred can be good ways to refill an empty pip collection. However, this is somewhat of a win-more situation. Having pips makes it easier to get hits, and hits gets you pips. If you find yourself near a projectile, you can also parry that to gain 2 pips. In fact, any parry will get you 2 pips, even for melee attacks. Still, that doesn't really solve the win-more situation of it. So instead, you can use the last method of gaining pips, running. Specifically, you must either super dash, air dash, or grounded dash. But if it has a slider, that slider must be set to 100. If you do this, and didn't use the same move last turn, you will gain 1 pip once you start moving. Super dash also gives an extra pip if you complete the move, but this doesn't come up super often. A good way to safely get pips, if, God forbid, you ever find yourself without enough to juke, is to jump high in the air and then fully air dash. Next, use a safe retreat option like air dodge down or pounce to get back on the ground and repeat. You only really need to do this twice, and then you can leverage your offensive pressure, using juke, to land a multi-hitting move or apply pressure that allows you to gain even more jukes. Though, how exactly should you play Mutant, offensively speaking? Well, if you said that he wasn't played like other characters, you would be right, but maybe not for the reason you expected. As usual, I'll break it down into 3 ranges, starting with medium range. This is perhaps Mutant's strongest range to be in, thanks to the mix-ups it can create. If you see my block guide, check it out, you know that has changed a lot over time. However, the changes made are part of what makes Mutant so strong in this range. With juke, you can hit an opponent with a fast attack such as upswipe from very far away. Even if they try to predict you doing so, the options for beating a fast attack are very limited. And of course, you don't have to juke either. Many of the options to contest your juke fast moves, like grab or punch, have a short range. This means if you don't juke, you can do a slow option like corkscrew or slash to beat that option. This by itself is already strong, turns every medium range encounter into a very complex 50-50 in your favor. And if you know Mutant better than your opponent, you can very easily dominate by doing surprisingly little. However, it gets even better, because you also have the option to juke backwards. This doesn't beat fast options, but it trades that for extreme safety. Juked back pounce, for example, is unbeatable with all but the hardest of callouts. This turns that 50-50 into a 100-0 in your favor. Combine this with the fact that Mutant has some of the best offensive options, and your opponent's offense starts to look pretty pitiful in comparison. But it's not like being defensive is easier for them either. Moves like Swipe have a low IASA, which, I'll check out my other video on that too by the way, means rolling often only puts your opponent back into the vortex. And good luck trying to parry. Each of your jukes changes the timing needed for your opponent to get one, so in effect, each move has up to 3 different timings for each angle of your attack. Then, if your opponent misses the parry, you at worst get 1 juke back after spending 2, but most often you get put in a +1 or +2 block advantage state, where all your moves now become even faster and harder to contest. This is part of the reason why I said block changes work so strongly in favor of Mutant. Overall, if you want advice in this range, don't focus on what you can do, because you are never short of options. Instead, think about what your opponent is clicking. If you are unsure, or maybe already winning, simply back off, or do a juke back pounce because of its extreme safety. If you know they're attacking, but not with what, do a move like Swipe or Low Swipe, which beat all offensive options. If they are trying to flee, Up Swipe catches pretty much everything, including roll and jump. The world is really your oyster at this point. The one sort of weakness of this range is jumping. Many of your moves have low hit stun, bad knockback angles, or high proration, which is damage reduction when you hit with certain moves. When your opponent jumps, they get around a lot of your slow options which don't tend to have those issues. Plenty of your options can call it out, like up swipe, dash attack, swipe, etc., but it isn't ideal. Just remember to call them out occasionally if you seem like they're trying to disrespect your low reward options. Either way, there is so much you can do, and your opponent feels that pressure way more than you do. The hardest part of medium range is actually getting into it. Speaking of which, you aren't going to be in medium range forever. Considering the most likely scenario, you should find yourself next in close range. This range, despite having some interesting technology, is a mixed bag. Your offensive options are still generally better, but not nearly as oppressive as before. No matter where you juke, you'll often be hit by a quick attack or grab, and because you're so close, you aren't able to abuse timing mix-ups like you can when you're in medium range. But it's not like you're playing the same game as your opponent, but you have better offensive options either. If you lose, you take more damage, as mentioned before. In addition, there's one more mechanic about juke that you should know. If you block, not push block, normal block only, and fail to parry, you will lose access to jukes for the rest of the next turn. Considering how much emphasis before I put onto jukes as a cornerstone of your offense, it's pretty clear how bad this is. This means, in practice, that blocking isn't an option if you wish to have any significant offensive presence next turn. Overall, this evens out the close range dynamic severely. Your opponent's offensive options are generally worse than yours, but you are practically unable to block. That is why I would suggest staying away from close range encounters, as it often comes down to winning a fair engagement, but you get punished more for losing. There is one secret technology that can trip up an unsuspecting opponent, though. That technology is called flippies. You see, if you approach an opponent from the right side, and then flip and juke to the left at the same time, many of your moves will phase through your opponent. This is surprisingly resilient, since if your opponent tries to flip and call you out, you no longer phase through. There are also 2 moves that can only do the opposite, which is you are on the left side and you flip and juke to the right, which are Pounce and Caustic Barrage. Don't ask me why only those 2 moves do that, but I just use the deck. I don't develop it. So you use that to cheat sometimes. Try it out. Anyways, the last range you have to consider is long range. Much like Robot, your options when in this range are limited. Mutants' projectiles are strong, at least in theory, but are glacially slow. Even pretty non-committal callouts like Vile Clutch can heavily punish you. This, in the end, means you should probably forego set play and focus on approaching quickly and safely. Mutant, luckily, happens to excel at this. Because you can juke movement, you can cover huge distances in no time. At the top end, a Slop Dash with juke can cover a huge number of distance indicators in just 11 or 10 frames. While costly, it can shut down moves like Quick Draw and Flame Wave, which you should attempt occasionally. If you don't have Slop Dash, Normal Dash in combination with Juke can still call out set play, though not as completely as Slop Dash can. Sometimes you can close the distance but only get 1 or 2 frames of advantage. In that case, you can either use a non-free cancelled swipe to get a free pip, or prepare another move for a free cancel 50-50. If you find yourself without jukes, long range is a good spot to try to regain them through dashing, especially if your opponent is playing particularly passively. But once you do decide to approach, you should stay grounded as much as you can, and try to use a series of small dashes in a row. Large movement is one of the easiest things to punish, and your opponent is looking for the opportunity, given both the fact that you take more damage when you're punished, and your medium range is so threatening. And don't feel afraid to take it slow. Projectile parries give a full refund on a single juke that you spend, so you can be liberal with how far you go to parry them. In addition, if your opponent decides to approach you instead, they are discarding any set play that may reduce your offensive presence. In other words, while your offense is great, that doesn't mean you should rush in to try to use it as soon as possible. Take it slow and try to get back in medium range while stockpiling resources. But do sometimes unleash the mutant jump scare on them, you just gotta unleash it sometimes. Next, let's talk about the air game for a little bit. There's not much to talk about, since anything other than close range doesn't really exist. When further out than grab range, it's usually very easy for both parties to disengage. And even when close, roll is very hard to punish. But when in throw range, it's usually very hard to beat grab. On the ground, you can normally just jump to beat it, but in the air, both parties are short on options. Some characters literally have nothing better than tying with grab, or can't punish even if they know you are grabbing. Mutant in this regard is lucky. Flippies still exist in the air, which is epic, but Juke itself can make several moves dodge your opponent's grab. Pounce is also grab immune, you have dodge down, which is way better than normal dodge, and get additional block advantage in the air. It's as heavily favored for you as medium range is, if not more, but your opponent knows that and can easily disengage before the situation ever becomes a reality. The same philosophy applies as it did in medium range. You have more options, both players should understand that, so keep that in mind when you're playing. Combo game. For Mutant, there are effectively 2 different combo modes you can be in, with Slop Dash and without Slop Dash. For reference, Slop Dash is a move you get after using Howl. It allows you to move in all directions very quickly, and can be used in conjunction with jukes to position yourself in some very good spots. However, once you use it, unless you use an attack for your next action, you will lose it until you use Howl again. And for some reason, Pounce doesn't count as an attack. I don't know why that's the case, by the way. As you'll see, Slop Dash is a strong tool in both neutral and combo, and the micro-positioning you can get with it is the main reason I consider with it and without it 2 whole different combo modes. Let's start with the no-slop variant. If your opponent is on the ground, you can do sweep into shockwave and repeat until he or she is sent airborne by the shockwave. Then if you have rebirth, you can continue once more by doing rebirth into slash, but that's very meter expensive. To be frank, with this combo you won't get a lot of damage, especially if you got the combo through slash or swipe or another high prioration move. However, it's important to end with sweep because of a very powerful setup that you can do. You see, if after using sweep, you use caustic spike and then a free cancelled shockwave, you get what we call a Mongolian ball detonation. The caustic spike hits all options your opponent has, except rolling, which generally means your opponent is forced to block. You could use this to land a corkscrew, which will refill your pips in addition to doing a bunch of chip, or you could turn off the spike, in which case you can use Envenom to not only get a combo, but do 2,000 damage over time from the poison effect. Furthermore, if set up properly, Envenom covers both roll and block, which should hopefully explain to you why you would trade combo damage for this. If you didn't start the combo on the ground though, you'll have to deal with a strictly worse air combo. Generally speaking, you should try to rack up damage through moves like Caustic Barrage, Vertical Slash, and a Rebirth if you can fit it in. Fun fact, Rebirth actually restores your air options, which can allow you to extend combos far beyond what they're normally able to go. So use that when you run out of air options and you might be able to extend a little bit more. After racking up the damage, you should end your combo with a Pounce, preferably Pounce down. Pounce has infinite hit stun, so you only need to land it once and then wait on the ground. If you make it to the ground before your opponent, you can try to set up a Caustic Spike or Shockwave, but MBDs are generally not feasible after this. Remember, more important than doing damage is maintaining pressure. Lose out on a few thousand damage if it allows you to set up projectiles, or moves that prevent your opponent from fully acting. Now, this whole situation changes if you do have Slop Dash. In this scenario, dash attack becomes your main damage dealer. This is because of how dash attack scales your combo. Normally, each move scales a combo by 1, meaning all future hits do less damage. However, multi-hitting moves only scale once, despite hitting several times, and dash attack just so happens to be a multi-hitting move. Although, there is a trick to it, because it's not as simple as using dash attack on repeat. Instead, you must hit on the 7th frame of dash attack. You'll know if you've done this correctly if you become actionable, and Mutant's claws are in an arc above his head. When done this way, not only is it harder to DI, but you can also chain it several times in a row without needing to wall splat. To reiterate, once you get a hit, repeat the sweep shockwave loop until your opponent is airborne. Then you slop dash and hit on the 7th frame of dash attack, of course following up with the second hit, and then depending on your opponent's DI, you can either air dash into the 7th frame hitbox again, or do that through insta-cancel into slop dash into dash attack. After doing this 2 or 3 times, your opponent should either be really high up or really close to the ground. If close to the ground, you can use slop dash into sweep for an MBD, or unideally end with a pounce. If high up, you can do a downwards pounce and usually have enough frames for a sweep, and that's the foundational basis for all mutant combos. There is some tech and alternative route, so let me know if you'd like another video specifically on that, but I won't cover that here. And that is just about the bare minimum you need to know to play Mutant. Let me know if this guide was useful, and maybe, perchance, subscribe. Maybe drop us a subscription. I mean, like, just maybe. Question mark? Smiley face? Emotion?